Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead, where we will be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. Aspire listeners, I'm so excited because I have my good friend Jorge Valenzuela with me today. He's an educator, a leader, a podcaster, an author. He just does it all. I am so excited to have him back on the show. If you haven't had a chance to listen to his previous episodes, please jump on right now, listen to those. He always provides such amazing wisdom. George, thank you so much for coming back on the Aspire to Lead podcast.
Josh, what's up, man? How are you?
Well, I'm great. Now I get a chance to talk with you. It's been a little bit of time since we've had a chance to chat, and I just want to get a little bit of an update on all the things that you're doing, because every time I'm on social media, I swear you're somewhere with a district, you're working with educators, you got new books coming out, you're just doing so much. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing with the Aspire listeners about what you're all up to.
Well, I think first thing I owe you a congratulations on the book. I know it's coming up on a year now.
Yeah.
And I love that book since my name is on the back. Thank you very much for that.
Well, I appreciate you actually giving me some feedback and being a part of that process.
Dude, it was awesome. And also on your new job. So you got a job in July, right, with Teach Better, and they're a great organization. So congratulations, dude.
Thank you.
As far as I go, I'm wrapping up the PhD program. I am coaching, as you know, full-time.
Yep.
I'm an author. I think I'm on the fourth book now. I'm writing a book through Forwind. It's on PBL and SEL. I wrapped up a book with Solution Tree, which will be out in October.
Yep.
That's on SEL. And I did the environmental science in PBL book last year through ISTE. And of course, wrap up robotics, which we talked about last time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm all over, man. I am just really loving this new journey I'm on and just everything I'm doing.
That's awesome. All right, so George, I want to dive into that because that is so much of your world now, is getting into schools and with your action research. So, will you just break that down for me as far as what that looks like and how you support schools?
Yeah, so for the audience out there, there's an article on Edutopia. It's called 5 Steps to Instructional Innovation. And so my coaching model is broken down there. But I want to back up a little bit and talk about my leadership role back in, I want to say 2007 is when I started at Richmond City Public Schools. And I know we talked about that last time, but there's something we didn't really talk about on the first episode. And it was this. I was in central office and I was over STEM, over computer science, but our director for CNI made sure that every 9 weeks, so 4 times a year, we were going into all 50 schools. And so what that means is this: we were doing learning walks. And in those learning walks, we would see instruction focus first on tier 1, which is the entire group message, and then looking at the tiered interventions, 2 and 3. And so I got to learn instruction on a very deep level very early on, but we got to support our teachers and our students because we got to know them and know where they were instructionally. So as a result, around 2010, we got all 50 schools accredited, fully accredited. And it was learning walks, man. It was just basically learning our teachers and personalizing all our interventions. And so as I started my business, initially, it wasn't computer science and STEM. But as I got into conversations with a lot of superintendents, they were like, George, like, you understand instruction on a deep level. So how can we improve our instruction? And so I just really developed a model where first step is doing an intake call and just really treating it as, qualitative research, where I'm writing down what you're saying, what the needs are, and I'm taking that into account. But our second step is the learning walks. And so when we bring in all the instructional leaders and they see what's happening and we see instruction, in real time, then when we go back and do a data debrief, which is step 3, then we can really celebrate our glows, like all the good things, but then look at the areas of, growth. And so if I'm called in and they want to do PBL, but their tier 1 instruction isn't right, then we know that we have to realign and, focus there first. Once we look at the data and we agree that we're all seeing and saying the same thing, then I would develop a PD solution based on those actual instructional needs. And we always do three interventions. One is for the administrators or for the coaches who have to support this. Two is for beginning teachers, and three are for veteran teachers. Everyone needs the same message, but maybe not in the same way.
Yep.
And if a lot of work is needed, then we'll actually do this in several milestones in like 1 year, 3 years, or 4 years,
Yeah.
or five sometimes.
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
A little differentiation for everybody on the campus.
And that's why you'll see me in so many different schools and writing about so many different things, or coaching on them, is because we're learning them through action research. And that's how knowledge is learned. Like you basically take whatever's been done about a topic, whether it's computer science, it's STEM, it's SEL, it's tiered instruction. You basically take what's already been done, which is your lit review, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they already have a model, a framework, a system, something that's already been developed. And so you and your small teaching team or admin team, you basically take this and you tweak it, adapt it, you collect data, and you learn from all your mistakes, but then you make it better. And so after 4 or 5, 6 months of doing that on one topic, you typically have a framework, lots of blog articles, right? Or a whole book. And so that's how it works.
Sure. So I want to go back to what you talked about with the learning walks, because that piqued my interest. I was thinking about my own journey as an administrator and trying to get into classrooms, and that was always a frustration for myself of not being able to spend as much time as possible in there. But when my time was devoted to the classroom, trying to make it as efficient as possible. So what were some things that you did within that process to make sure that you were being successful with potentially a small amount of time?
So what we basically do is this: is we have to build our trust with our teachers, right? So when we have a leadership or an instructional leadership team, we make sure that there are administrators, there are some lead teachers, lead coaches, but we also have to sprinkle in a few of the teachers. And here's the reason why. Never make any decision about teachers or talk about teachers if they're not in the room represented somehow.
Right.
And I've got 4 rules, right? First rule is we let them know we're coming. Second rule, we don't put their name on any document. Third rule is we're looking only at instruction. And fourth, no more than 10 minutes. And when you let them know up front what's happening and we're improving instruction, and then we have a problem statement that we develop after doing the learning walk, then that makes it to action research, right?
Yep.
It's a problem statement is basically this: it's where we are, where we want to go, and how we think that we're actually going to get there. And so that's really, I think, how all PD should be developed.
Yep.
Right? Now, if you're at a conference, it's a different story. But if a school or a district is paying a lot of money for any type of PD, you have to do the learning walks first. I mean, in my opinion,
Yep.
I just don't see how one message fits everyone.
Right.
Unless if it's like a new content or like, something that's an initiative, like, computer science, right? Like, there are many ways of coding, but you don't necessarily have to do a whole action research study on it, right? Now, you can look at studies and see, well, what's the easiest way of doing this? So maybe it's having folks do, like, write some pseudocode. They want to solve a problem. So write some pseudocode, make a flow chart, and then go code, right? So that's the methodology there.
I love it. So let's talk about the data piece, because you are one of action research, but you also are data driven and in that decision making. So, for someone that comes in, let's say they go by those 4 rules, they're spending their 10 minutes within the classroom looking at instruction only. What are some data pieces that they should be looking at to make sure that, they are using that moving forward for potentially PD or some other decision making?
Yeah, so I have a document, and there's one that I use with my schools, but all schools have their own, right?
Yeah.
But I'm basically looking at, I saw evidence. I saw that instruction is aligned, that the learning goals are on the board, and the learning goals are being articulated in the mini lesson. And if we don't arrive in the mini lesson, then we're seeing the follow through of the goal, the learning goal, the I can statement, or the students will be able to in order to. that we're seeing the follow through in the work of the kids. Either there's a teacher that is standing up in front of the room and they are delivering a whole group message, or you've got young people working and they're circling. Like it's one or the other, right? Or there's a presentation happening. But either way, we want to make sure that the learning goal of that day, of that lesson, of the project is what's being uplifted either by young people or by the teacher. And so we have that one field I saw. Another field is I wonder if something is not making sense, right? We don't want to assume, right? So I wonder means I need some clarity here. And that is one of the points that we discuss later on in our data debrief. And then finally, here's how I think we can improve this, make it better. And so that is what the conversation is afterwards. And everyone that's on that small teaching team, we make sure that everyone is seeing and saying the same things. Now, other school districts use high yielding instructional strategies. And so they want to see evidence of that.
So I love that you talked about the data debrief, right? So that's sometimes a lot of the difficult piece also is you're able to get into a classroom, potentially have that time to do that, but then also the immediate feedback to the teacher that you're actually observing and taking data on. What are some best practices or strategies that you like to do as far as providing that data to make sure that they're feeling successful in that process?
Yeah, so there's 5 things that I think are important that in 15 years of doing learning walks, I've seen that there's 5 things that very confident teachers all have in common or a variation thereof. And so the first thing is being able to manage through a crisis and, pivot. And I think we all know about that, so there's no need to talk about that. Number 2 is just having a standards aligned and competency-based aligned lesson unit that is research-based and that is personalized for who's in the room. 3 is just a toolbox of 5 to 6 high-yielding strategies that are going to focus on 2 things: student engagement and achievement. There's a strong correlation there in the research, and you can't have one without the other. And then 4 is having a system or some metrics, right, of how they are assessing or monitoring student engagement and achievement. And then 5 is monitoring their own impact. How are they doing as a teacher? And I think that if we focus on those 5 things at a baseline, not only do you have your tier 1 instruction straight, but you have the foundation for anything else you want to do. And I think that's very important.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
I want to talk about another topic that you're passionate about, which is the social emotional learning aspect of things. Because I know some people like to put SEL in a box. It's a standalone. And instruction is over here, and the two don't match up. And sometimes it's even, I don't have enough time to really work on the social emotional learning things because I have to really focus on the instruction, the assessment piece of the job. So when folks try and put things in a box, is that something that you speak on? And is there a blend or a balance that should be occurring in the classroom?
All right, so let's back up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So my introduction to SEL was really just emotional intelligence. And back in 2018, 2019, I was going through something like with my own children. And I realized that I needed some help. And I was reading an article, and it was by Dr. Travis Bradbury. And in the article, 2 words just, jumped out at me, which is emotional intelligence, which if you think about it now, that's the result of SEL. Right. If you're doing social emotional learning, then the whole goal is that you develop your EQ skills. And so I started there and I just worked on myself. Now, if someone would have told me that we'd be doing workshops on this stuff, I would have never, ever believed them. But I had a client in North Carolina, Hertford County Public Schools, Dr. William Wright's a superintendent. And Tammy Ward is the now superintendent, but she was assistant superintendent. And I want to say in April 2020 is when she showed me the DPI NC state aligned framework
Right.
for online learning. And SEL was on the list. And she's like, George, we have to figure this out. And so action research, what's been done? Well, Castle has a framework. And when I looked at it, it's got 5 competencies. 4 of the competencies were in emotional intelligence 2.0 in the book. So it's basically very aligned. And so we just, did the action research. We sat down and I treated it as a study where she told me and some of the admin and some of the teachers what we need to do. And their thing was this: we've got young people that were relying on food from our schools. Mm-hmm. And so we decided, well, we can't teach now. We have to go drop off the food. Some young people had no Wi-Fi. And so what we did was this: once we got them all online, then our focus was this: how do we activate SEL, making them emotionally ready to do the work without losing instructional focus? And so I'm not sure if you saw, but there's an article I have out there where we talk about an emotions planner. And so Mrs. Ward, that was her idea. I showed her a picture, and it's where you have a situation that is triggering you, and you try to figure out what's happening internally, how you're feeling, and then finding a strategy. And so I went ahead, looked at the research, found that there's a Plutchik's wheel that's got 8 primary emotions and all the secondary ones. And so we made a planner. And so the planner was just for, hey, when something happens. And so what I didn't know at the time was that became like the first step of the framework, right? Now, a lot happened after that, George Floyd and things like that. And so we had teachers that would unpack that. And so the superintendent, Dr. Wright, was like, hey, I think we need to examine what we believe about the kids and what we believe about each other. And so that's when we looked at, number 2, assessing what you believe. And then third, I just knew this from all the work I had already been doing, is that you have to also improve your knowledge of students. You have to know young people, not just as learners, but you have to know them as individuals, which means that you have to learn about what their interests, what their goals and their assets are in tandem with their academic, their career, and their SEL needs. Yeah. There's 3 types of learning in school. There's academic, there's career, and there's SEL, right? Those are like the 3 buckets I've seen. And you have to know those things and know them as people in order to make the sound instructional decisions, but also to form relationships, which you talk a lot about empathy. And so the 4th step is that now that we know all this, we know what EQ is, we know what we believe about the kids and our colleagues, and we know them as people and as learners. Now we can activate SEL in our lessons as needed, right? And so some young people have trauma. And so you got to be a little trauma informed so that you don't re-traumatize them. Yep. And that you help and meet them where they are. Some young people might have an argument, might have a fight. And so as a teacher, I might have to restore justice at times. And so all of these things are just in my action research and in my book and in my work with schools, is just updating our SEL plans with the diverse needs of our kids, right? So it's not becoming a complete, I know all this different information. No, it is you are using what we have discovered that works in a situation.
Right.
And we have some basic practices. They're not the only practices in the world, but they're enough to really get someone started.
Well, I want to talk about your project that you've gone on with BAM Radio. It's in line with the same topic, which is SEL in Action podcast. I want to know the origin story. Where did that project come from?
Oh, man. So there's a guy named Carl Hooker. I know you know Carl. And, he's an unbelievable talent. I mean, he's one of the best podcasters I ever heard. And I haven't heard a whole lot of them, but he's amazing. And I was invited on his show. And I'll be honest, like back in the day, it's not like PD, right? It's not like where everyone's like in person. So when someone has a voice like him and you can't see his face, like you just hear the voice, like, for me in the beginning, it was very intimidating. But on the second time, I'm not sure what happened, but the show producer, Errol St. Clair Smith, said, "Hey, George, we would love for you to now interview Carl." And so I'm a firm believer in this, that if someone invites you to do something, it means you're ready. Now, it doesn't mean that you know how to do it, but it means you're ready. And so luckily, those shows are only 10 to 12 minutes. They're research based. There's no fluff. There's no like, look at me, I'm great, sort of narrative. It's basically, it's getting down to what teachers need and want to know. So I listened to a few of the episodes and I wrote it up in like 30 minutes, man. Like I look at his timeline. I saw that he was like the first person on an airplane back in 2021 or like, whatever. And I did my best. After that, I was invited to do my own show. And so Errol and his wife, Jeanette, they produce the entire show. They edit everything. I'll say this, working with Errol has really helped me improve my message in as little words as possible. And by focusing on the pain points of the audience instead of a narrative like we often see with a lot of influencers online. Hey, I'm great, and look what I'm doing, and I'm buff, and I'm this, all these different things. It's more about figuring out what are teachers saying. Just go to hashtag teachers.
Right.
See what's going on. Then look at EdWeek research because they really are doing this in real time. Like they're putting out exactly what are the conversations at schools?
Yep.
What are the conversations and what's happening in schools is also happening in your living room now and at your table, right? Like everyone is talking about things that really matter. And so if you look at my show, it's those topics.
Yep.
And it's kind of like a journalist approach. And I don't consider myself a podcaster, by the way. I just think that having a podcast or doing podcasts is just part of education. Like it's like the blog, right? Like how can you have a business now and not have a podcast? Like you don't have a blog. So,
yep.
And it's been a great experience. I've learned a lot. And I think that it's a tandem. I think folks that have really worked on themselves and are really helping other people, I think folks like that, they kind of earn the right to share their story. But I think I'm in the stage now where I'm learning, or I've been learning, how to help educators the way they need to be helped. So it's less about me and more about them.
Well, I absolutely love the podcast. I consider you a podcaster myself, but that's okay if you don't want to identify that way.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
You got a great voice and a great message, and I just love everything that you're doing, not only on the podcast, but with your books too. But I want to talk about another exciting project you got going on with a good friend of the Aspire podcast, Sheldon Aikens. So you guys are putting together something special, really. It's called Instructional Innovation Partners. So will you just share with the listeners what that project's about?
Yeah, so Instructional Innovation Partners is a nonprofit. And for a long time now, I've been being asked by a lot of other consultants or folks that want to be consultants, hey, George, how do I do what you do, right? But the thing is this, not everyone is that hybrid of entrepreneur, education coach, author, podcast host, like all these different things, right? Not many people have all these different things that they've worked on, but they have other talents, right? They have certain pieces of those. And so I've always felt like what I do is good for George. It's good for who I'm working with, but it's good for me as far as my business. But how can I help other people improve theirs? When you have an LLC or you have a corporation, you can't really get grant funded. And so someone explained to me that if you get a nonprofit, first, you can qualify for grants and then you can write them and you can basically write folks in that you want to work with.
Right.
And so I just thought, hey, I've got a coaching model, I have a PBL model, SEL. I have all these different models. And how amazing would that be if I can bring in a couple of other people into one district with me and show them what to do? So not only are all the teachers benefiting, all the admin benefiting, but now this person is benefiting that they're improving their own business.
Right.
And I met Sheldon, the Dr. Akins, I should say. I met him in Chicago. I was at a conference and I heard a lot about him. I've seen him online and I mean, he's an amazing guy. And he came to sit front row in my thing. And afterwards, like we had a conversation and we had dinner. And it turns out that he wants to help people too as well. Because when you have a nonprofit, you're helping more than you're actually getting.
Yep.
That's the main thing. A lot of people don't know that. It's about helping other people. And so we sat down, man, and we put it all together. And we got status. And so now we're working on what we have to work on so we can help other people. Yeah, so I'm excited about that.
Kudos to you and to Dr. Sheldon Akins. You guys are fantastic, and I'm just so excited to see what will come of this and how many people will be helped. Not only folks that are looking to consult, but then also the schools that get those services also. And we're coming toward the end of our show, and I love asking this question to all my guests, and I've asked you this before. You know, for those who are aspiring to be leaders, or maybe they're current leaders now, if there's something they can do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you advise them to do?
All right, so let's tie it back to learning walks.
Let's do it.
Since we talked about that. So the classroom is the incubator for whatever is needed in a specific school and by those specific kids and by that teacher. An administrator, a teacher leader, a coach, a lead teacher will never have their finger on the pulse of what's needed in that school or in that classroom if they're not visiting the classrooms, if they're not doing the learning walks, if they're not listening to their teachers. Teachers are the most prominent experts of the kids. And so you need to be listening to our teachers before making decisions about those teachers.
So true. Well, George, once again, you've provided so much wisdom in this episode. And if someone is looking to connect with you on social media, how may they do that?
And George does PBL, that's JORGE, on all the platforms.
All the platforms.
Just find them. Yeah, like it's that easy. And at lifelonglearningdefined.com.
I mean, when he says every social media platform, George means it. I mean, the man is even on TikTok.
Oh my! I still don't know what to do with that. So I met someone. It's Jen Manley. I met her in Chicago last week, and she said, if you post on TikTok for 30 days straight, the algorithm's going to do something. So I'm trying it out. Not sure if it works, but I'm trying it out.
Hey, if she said it, I would guess that she's, very wise in that statement. So
yeah,
I've played with it a little bit myself, but I have not been diligent enough to do anything with it. But for everyone that's listening, please check out the show notes because all of those social media links, but then also links to his books, to his services. I mean, everything that George is doing, I'm going to try and put in the show notes for you. Make sure that you're bringing them out to your district, to your school. I assure you that his things that he's created for all the different topics we've talked about, the frameworks, do a lot of good for not only the structure of the school, but for the students. And I just appreciate you so much, George, and what you do for all of our educators and our leaders and for coming onto the Aspire to Lead podcast once again.
Thank you so much, bro. I appreciate you, Josh.
Are you excited that in-person conferences are back? I know I am. In fact, I'm excited to announce that I'll be at the 2022 Teach Better Conference this October 14th and 15th in Akron, Ohio. I'll be recording episodes live in Podcast Row, attending sessions, speaking, and connecting with a whole bunch of amazing educators. It would be awesome if you could join us. Head over to teachbetterconference.com/register and use the code ASPIRE2022 to save $50 off your 2-day registration. I hope to see you in October.